Take a moment. Okay, so that live stream is working now. It's on YouTube. People can click through to it on our website at portofhoodriver.com/live-stream. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it off so you're not hearing me. There's a few seconds of delay between our meeting and the live stream, but we're ready now for you to call us to order. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen that will have the packet for everybody to be able to see if you're following along on the screen.
Okay, in that case, I'll call us to order at 5:07. And the first thing up, Michael, do we have any modifications or additions to the agenda?
President Everett, just a couple of clarifications. Two of the approval items in the consent agenda, B and C, are both ratification items for different reasons. Bulldog Welding is explained in the email. And C, the changeover of the Tapani, that is related to the fact that the commission has already approved authority for me to authorize change orders up to a certain amount that aren't related to the fuel farm. And then second, under C, that number is stated correctly in the memo, but on the agenda, it should be $3,327.71 to be accurate.
Okay.
Michael, I would just also on the consent agenda, this is actually amendment number 2 with OTAC. So a clarification there as well.
And one other thing, John, as a result of our last meeting when we held by video conference, Commissioner Shepard pointed out that it's a little bit difficult to see who is in attendance, and so maybe we should do a roll call.
Okay, then I think we should just have everybody call their own name. If you stop sharing screen, and we'll get the whole grid on screen, people could call their own name in sequence, starting with you, Genevieve.
I'm Genevieve Scholl. I'm the communications manager for the Port of Hood River.
John Everett, President, Hood River Port Commission, present.
Kevin, that must be my turn. Kevin Greenwood, Port of Hood River Bridge Replacement.
Ben, you're up.
Ben Shepard, Commissioner, Port of Hood River.
Christy Chapman, Port Commissioner, Hood River.
Go ahead, Hobie. We must have different screens.
We do.
Yeah.
Host right.
See everybody in the same sequence. Okay, I'll do it then. Ann Medenbach, staff, Port of Hood River. Hobie Strike is present, Commissioner, Port of Hood River. Maria Diaz is President, staff, Hood River. Kevin Greenwood, staff, Port of Hood River. Jerry Jakes, legal representation, Port of Hood River. Christy Chapman, Commissioner, Port of Hood River. Fred Cowell, Financial CFO, Port of Hood River. Michael McElway, Executive Director, Port of Hood River. David Merriweather, Commissioner, Port of Hood River. Emily Fitzgerald from the press. Welcome, Emily. Nice to see you again. Mike Zillis is from the public. Daryl Stafford, staff, Port of Hood River. John Davies is, I guess, a guest. Garth Aponitis, I'm sorry, Garth, if I got that wrong, is representing from DKS. And Amanda, I don't know how you relate, Amanda.
I'm also with DKS.
Okay, and Amanda Deering with DKS is present as well.
Thank you.
Yes. So we're roll call and we have had our modifications. Do we have any public comment?
So you've received public comment in your meeting packets. There's several emails that were sent with the packet on Friday, and then also 3 more emails that were sent to you this morning.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any questions. Michael, is there anybody present in the room to give any public comment?
No, there's no one present.
I assume all the commissioners have had a chance to review the public comment. In that case, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody have any comment on the consent agenda?
I don't have a consent agenda comment, but on the public comment, I'm sorry, I didn't get unmuted quickly enough. I
Okay.
knew people that had reached out to the port, and so I talked to them individually, and they all said they were very happy with Genevieve's response to them, and they felt like they were heard and listened to. So I don't know if you heard that, but I heard it from everybody I spoke to.
No, that's encouraging. Did I miss anybody else that just by moving too fast? In that case, can we get a motion for the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
And a
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye, passes. Number 3 for presentations. Sorry.
John, can you, we couldn't hear who seconded.
Um,
Hobie.
Okay, thank you.
And then number 3 on the agenda, presentation and discussions. First up is the preliminary traffic modeling report. Michael, you want to leave that off?
Yes, let me do that. Amanda and Garth have been introduced with DKS Associates. DKS was retained by the port in January to update the traffic model for the waterfront. This is a progress report on their effort. It's intended to provide an update on the steps they've taken and a preview of the steps they will take to complete, and a chance to ask and answer any questions about the work that's underway. So let me introduce Garth Aponitis first.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Michael.
And I'll get your presentation going. So let me get the presentation going. And let me go back to share my screen. Hold on one moment. So Garth, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
All right, will do. All right, thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for having us, everybody. As Michael mentioned, we're here tonight to provide an overview of some of the work that we've been doing. Just to provide some context, we'll be back in front of you at a later date, but just wanted to set the stage for that and let you know some of the additional findings that will be forthcoming. So overall, why we're here and the work that we're up to goes back to some of the prior transportation planning efforts within the city of Hood River, as well as the waterfront area in particular. And I'll provide some background and talk about those a little bit. But the purpose of our analysis is really to get at looking at the growth that's occurred over the last 10 years. How much additional growth potential is there in the waterfront, and at what point are some of the vehicle capacity triggers improvements to the interchange and the surrounding transportation system? How close are those to becoming a reality and necessary before we can proceed with additional development? If you could go to the next slide, please.
Okay. If I can figure out how to do that, I will. There we go.
All right, so as I mentioned, I'll give you a little bit of background of prior work efforts that go back about the last 10 years. Then I'll talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the next couple months, look ahead to what we're going to bring before you next time we provide a presentation to you, and then look ahead also to future potential steps. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next one as well. So looking back over the last 10 years for transportation planning, there were really two key work efforts in Hood River, and in particular in the waterfront area. So one of those was the transportation system plan. And so the transportation system plan took a 20-year look at the transportation needs throughout the entirety of the city of Hood River, looking at what traffic counts looked like 10 years ago, and then the amount of growth that was projected over the following 20 years to the year 2031. So that transportation system plan, or TSP, identifies a number of transportation improvements and investment strategies across the city. The other key undertaking was the Interchange Area Management Plan, or IAMP, that was conducted for exit 63 and 64. Those were looked at jointly. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that, but really that effort and the TSP process were conducted somewhat concurrently, and there's consistency between them. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So as Michael mentioned, there's this transportation model, and that was developed as part of the prior IAMP analysis efforts, as well as used for the transportation system planning efforts. And what the traffic model seeks to achieve is an understanding of what some of the future circulation and capacity needs are around the city of Hood River. And so it includes all the local streets that were in there, different characteristics about traffic control, and then looks at future growth. So looking out over the 20-year horizon, still 10 years from now, as additional density and development occurs on the west side, in the heights, and throughout the city, what does that start to look like for traffic operations and traffic needs? That model, when it was developed 10 years ago, it's based on the comprehensive system plan and the types of land uses and the degree of growth that was anticipated over a 20-year planning horizon. Obviously, we didn't have an intermediate year of analysis of 2020, but since we're now halfway through that horizon, this was an opportunity to kind of pause and take a look and see what the development thresholds look like. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for the IAMP, the key outcome there was there's several development triggers or future interchange capacity improvements that are identified. And each of those, as you can see, they're primarily located along the 2nd Street corridor. There's also an improvement identified over at Highway 35, where that intersects with State Street. This is just a kind of a summary of what those locations look like. You can go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
One of the key outcomes for the IAMP, though, was having a general understanding of what the phasing of those future improvements might look like. And so this is just a table that appears in the IAMP. There were those 5 different intersection locations that were identified both along 2nd Street and also over at Highway 35 and State Street. And there was a projection done at the time based on growth over the 20-year period, when approximately did it appear that some of those improvements would be needed. So as you can see, some of those improvements were identified to be likely near-term improvements. So at 2nd and Oak Street, potential intersection signalization. Some of those, down to the bottom end of the table, were identified as being longer-term needs. So for instance, at 2nd Street and Riverside, some of the improvements there. The key thing from the IAMP, though, is that there were these development triggers identified, which is based on traffic volumes at different movements at the intersection. And one of the key things to keep in mind for the waterfront area, and this part of Hood River in particular, is that A lot of it's seasonally driven. The amount of recreational activity during the summer, the amount of regional trips going through and stopping off of 84 during the summer as well. But this while most of ODOT planning is focused on a 30th highest hour or the peak season, the triggers in the IAMP were actually tied to an average weekday condition. So the other challenges is that, again, depending on the weather or the day, the uses might vary quite a bit and the traffic volumes might vary quite a bit, but this is intended to be reflective of an average weekday. Another thing I'll point out too is of those 5 intersections, a couple of them actually aren't really related to the degree of development activity in the waterfront. So ironically, the two interchange ramps themselves, the westbound 84 ramps and the eastbound 84 ramps, those have traffic movements that aren't directly tied to people that would be accessing the waterfront area, either going to it or leaving it. Next slide, please. All right, so that's a quick background of some of the prior work that was done, just kind of setting the stage for the work that we're doing now. I guess if there's any initial questions before I go ahead.
Garth, I think you might have mentioned this while I had to step away, but it struck my memory is the first issue or the first response, if there was a trigger, close to a trigger, was the prohibition of the left-hand turn westbound on Riverside at 2nd. Is that accurate? Is that the first thing, or is it the signal at 2nd and Oak downtown?
Actually, Riverside might have been 2nd and Oak was the first one, and actually Riverside was one of the latter ones.
The right in, right out condition was a later step.
Yeah. Can you go back to the 2 slides prior, please? And then one more. Yeah. So perfect. So yeah, on this table, so over on the far left, there was that. Again, this was based off analysis that was conducted a decade ago. But at the time, it was identifying that the 2nd and Oak improvements would likely be needed first in the near term.
I got it. Okay.
There at the top of the table, and then towards the bottom, 2nd and Riverside would be further on in the planning horizon. Here it was estimated to be 2030, but again, those were based off of projections a decade ago.
If I could ask a question, so the volume numbers in the right-hand column, those are the number of trips that would occur that would trigger these improvements? Is that what, when say the 2nd and Cascade intersection or 2nd and Oak reaches 600 trips during the PM peak weekday,
Yeah.
that would then trigger that improvement needing to be made?
Exactly. And that was, and part of the rationale behind that was it was intended to be a simple singular metric that could easily be looked at and measured. But obviously at any kind of traffic intersection, really the need depends on other movements as well. I mean, if those 600 vehicles were the only vehicles at the intersection, that the trigger probably wouldn't be needed. But there were some assumptions made about progressive growth over the years. Right. But you're right, it goes back to that movement. So it is during a single peak hour in the evening, which is typically the critical time period.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. And any other questions before we go ahead? All right, can you advance 2 slides, please? All right, so as I mentioned, the key question we're trying to address or understand is what is the status of those triggers? How close are we to reaching those? Are we right there knocking on the door, or is it quite a ways off? And then looking beyond that, with additional growth in the waterfront area, then what then what happens? Will that growth shoot us well past those triggers at this point? Do we think that maybe things haven't developed that the way that we thought they would, and maybe the triggers won't be met? So that's really the question we're trying to answer. So our current work plan really has a few key components. One of those is we collected some new data, and I'll talk about that. We've been updating these models. And then the next time, and then we're also going to be analyzing a few growth scenarios, and that's what we'll be talking about next time a little bit more. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the list at the bottom is not exhaustive. It's just a sample, but we worked with Michael and put together a list of some of the different developments and activities that have occurred over the last 10 years. And that's just an aerial shot there on the left of what it looked like back in 2010 and what it looks like now in 2020. And so as you're well aware of, there's been a lot of activity and development over that time period. And again, the list at the bottom is not exhaustive, it's just a sample. Next slide, please. Let's see. Looks like Genevieve might have stepped away for a second, so I'll start talking about the next information as well.
Genevieve just came around. There's apparently an accident at exit 63. The truck was on fire. And then we had an officer from CritVic just come in on a second issue, and he was struck on the bridge going northbound just south of the lift span a few minutes ago. So there's a lot of activity happening, traffic activity happening here while you're talking.
Great.
All right, thank you. So first new data. So the first step was we took a look at some of the new data. And we collected some traffic counts at some of those trigger intersections back in February. And so this was before the declaration of the pandemic and before we had seen a major shift in kind of typical daily activities and traffic volumes. So, one thing to point out, February is not a peak activity month. There's only a certain amount of activity, customers visiting some of the businesses, and then recreational activity on the water. But for the purpose of time and schedule, we went ahead and collected those to take an initial look. We'd had discussions prior to the pandemic about collecting updated traffic counts in May or June, which would be more representative. But that, again, we're discussions from a couple months ago, and so those will still be decisions we'll need to make about when the timing is appropriate for those. Then the other
Could I
step.
ask a question, please?
Yes, sir.
When you did the work, traffic analysis here before, did you find a relationship, say, between a February and a June count or something like that you could extrapolate maybe the February data forward? Or would that be accurate? Do you have any comfort in the accuracy of doing something like that?
Yeah, so we didn't specifically look at February during the prior work. What ODOT has along the interstate or other ODOT facilities, they do have some traffic counters that continue to monitor traffic on a daily or an annual basis. And it's common to apply these seasonal factors to those. With the waterfront area in particular, though, we don't have that data. What I can say is that for this area of the city, though, again, the average weekday is what was critical, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the work that we're doing to estimate those different components or adjustments that we're making as well. So in addition to the traffic counts that we collected in February, we also took an inventory or an update of some of the existing land uses out there. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we were provided with a list of the development activity over the last 10 years. We conducted a field survey to verify those assumptions and incorporate that information into the model. Because one of the key ways the model operates is the land use, whether it's the number of employees or the amount of recreational trips. We want to have the traffic data that we can use to verify that the model is being somewhat realistic. So that's the purpose of using both the land use as well as the traffic counts that we conducted. Go to the next slide, please. So the analysis that we were doing now is intended to be due diligence work on the port's effort to get an understanding for planning purposes and decision making, and understanding how close we are to approaching those triggers. For the formal discussions and formal declaration of those triggers, they would require additional coordination with ODOT, and I'll talk about some of those other steps later on. But this was intended to be a quick and timely assessment of where things stand now. So because of that, we took a pretty focused look at some things. So first of all, we focused just on the waterfront area. Obviously, over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of other activity and changes in the city, but really we're just focused on the area in the waterfront. It really isn't appropriate to go through a whole citywide model update just for the understanding of what activity looks like in the port. And some of those assumptions and analysis and model updates could be undertaken at a later time when the city does update their transportation system plan. So there's some things that right now we've made some focused assumptions and updates that would be addressed more broadly when that additional work is done in the future. So those things would be things like revisiting growth assumptions in other parts of the city. What do we think the Heights is going to look like 20 years from now versus what we thought it would look like 10 years ago? What are the recreational volumes going to look like coming in and out of the area? Can you go to the next slide, please? So we took an initial look at some of the land use changes that have happened and the development that's happened in the waterfront area. And I'd say that the quick takeaway from this slide is, and for the purposes of the model, we really categorize employment into 3 different bins. One of those are retail jobs, which typically have a higher traffic impact because of the customers and other patrons visiting the store. There's also a variety of service jobs. Some of those also may have patrons that visit them, but not at the same frequency and magnitude that some retail jobs or food and dining may have. And then there's other jobs which capture both industrial jobs and a variety of office jobs. So at the top row, you can see some of the jobs that we had in the model back in 2010, and there was a little bit over 200 total jobs. Now looking in 2020, we were approaching 600. So a two and a half fold increase from what was in there before. The TSP, and consistent with the comprehensive plan, the zoning and comprehensive plan that's out there today, and future growth potential on some of those either underutilized or undeveloped sites, there is a fair amount of growth opportunity still projected as far as a land use capacity standpoint, at least back to the assumptions that were used in the model 10 years ago. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the work that we're going to be embarking on now, if you can go to the next slide, please. So back to these IAMP triggers. understanding that traffic, there's different components of traffic, and some of those from the counts in February, we were able to directly measure. Others of those we're having to do our best job in judgment estimating what some of those impacts might look like. Some of those, like additional traffic growth due to additional development, are based on engineering judgment and calculations. So really, as we look at the triggers in those different locations, if we think about what contributes to traffic at those locations. And so some of the methods that we're using that go into those is, first of all, there's the traffic counts we collected in February. That's one piece of the pie. Another piece of the pie is there's some uses and sites out there that have been improved, but may have been vacant or underutilized when we collected the traffic counts in February. You might not have any changes to the land use whatsoever, but if you come back in 2 months or in a non-COVID time, maybe it looks like a heavier use, even though there's been no applications approved. The other piece I mentioned about before is we recognize that currently, or back in February, the recreational component was undermeasured. The February conditions, the recreational levels we acknowledged aren't the same as May or June. And then there'll be some recreational growth for future years. And the other key thing, the second to last item there, the future development scenarios, and that's really what we want to focus on. A couple slides prior, I was talking about the additional development potential based on land vacancy or land availability in the waterfront. And so we want to understand, well, what do the traffic impacts look like? What are some different options, and would they have different levels of traffic impacts? So that as you're making decisions going forward about opportunities in the waterfront, have an understanding of what the outcomes of those might be. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the coming work, we're going to take a look at those IAMP triggers. And so as we look at these scenarios, there's really a couple different dials we can think about. One is related to the scale of the development, and that could be by square footage, the type of use, the number of employees. There's different ways, and we can, if we have one metric, we can adjust to the others. The other one is thinking about potential locations. So some of the ideas that we've heard that have been in discussion in the past is what does lot one look like if there's varying levels of development density there? What about a potential hotel site in different areas? So the one thing I was hoping to hear from you, if there's any either broad general ideas for scenarios, or if there's specific scenarios that you'd like for us to take a look at as we think about some of these different development potential scenarios and how they might relate to those IAMP triggers. I don't know if anybody has any initial thoughts right now, or any thoughts about those two that were identified as potential scenarios we'd take a look at.
Garth, I think that the hotel has been mentioned. Also, there's been discussion at commission around a condominium development. Lot one developing as general commercial is still in the discussion. And our conundrum to start with has been, does the traffic study constrain any of those activities, or are any of those activities specifically heavier than others?
Mm-hmm.
I would actually, and also I want to know, what is our limit? What can we do? What particular, I don't know if we have to identify the activity to identify, can we do it, or can we know on the front end what is the trigger, what is the trip count that we can have, and then identify what we might want to do that would take up X amount of that trip count is what I want to know, because I don't want to get into a project where we say do a hotel and then after that find out that we can't do anything else.
Mhm.
So Garth, I recall in the contract, there's scope allows for 3 different scenarios. And so maybe it doesn't have to be right now, but we need to confirm what scenarios that we want to look at. Unless there's a different way to look at it, but that by modeling growth or development on one specific property, we should be able to then be able to compare that to what the remaining capacity is before we hit a trigger point, I presume. So in a way, it may not matter too much which scenarios there are that we choose, but I would say that lot 1 is, if you modeled the entire build out of lot 1 according to the development plan, it's, I don't know, 180,000 square feet or so of under current zoning, light industrial with a modicum of commercial allowed. So it seems like we should model the Barman property as one. It doesn't have, it can be a mixed use project, it can be a hotel, it can be straight up retail for one. And then for lot 1, we can either model, say, half of the build out there, or we can model a full build out, or a full build out with the potential zone change that allows for office, industrial office.
In that, would we need to include Maritime Site and South Jensen, things that we've talked about before that are far more ready and more likely to be done before lot 1? Or do we need to just take the biggest to get the idea of what we can do, the biggest potential project?
Garth, what do you think on that? Does it depend, does it matter too much where the development's located? Maritime is the one in the far northwest corner of the waterfront.
Yeah, so for so I'd say generally no. There might be some cases where a specific location is more critical, if that's adding to one of the particular movements at the trigger intersections. I believe for instance, at 2nd and Riverside, see, I think 2nd and Riverside was related to northbound traffic, either going through or right. And so I believe if there was someone making a left turn on the Riverside to go back that way, that wouldn't necessarily count towards the trigger. But we can take a closer look at that. Overall, I think having the scenarios is helpful because they provide some illustrative examples. What we can also do is kind of a sensitivity test where we can give some, if for the locations, if we determine the approximate magnitude of the threshold, we can give some sample developments that would contribute, size and scale that would contribute that accordingly, just for reference.
That sounds like you're closing in a little better, Garth, on Ben's comment. We really need to know when we are sitting at the table assessing one proposal versus another, it's going to be important for us to know what the ramifications of our decisions are for the future. And the Maritime building is a great example. We build out lot 1 and find out we have used all of our capacity, and Maritime now is not developable. We've given away, we have passed on one of the more compelling pieces for a lesser development.
Okay. Yeah, and the other, and again, given the number of assumptions and caveats that are going into this work, again, traffic counts collected in February. We realize there's a number of assumptions going in there. When we come back to one of the things we plan on showing is some pie charts so you can kind of see those contributing factors. How much of that trigger do we think is based on this seasonal recreation, use that, for lack of data, we're just estimating? or based on some of those uses that are approved but might not be fully utilized at this time. And so from that, I think just rather than the scale of just one number and that trigger, you can have an understanding of what some of the uncertainty might be at this point in time as well.
Garth, is the way this works in terms of the way ODOT administers IMPs, if say we did a development that used up, hit a trigger point, say to do east or west bound access ramp work on I-84 there at exit 63, is the way it really works is that if you create that level of traffic impact, then you're going to have to make those improvements, as opposed to you've reached it and you hit the max and that's it. You can't do anything else.
Yeah, I would have to, unfortunately, have to defer that question to ODOT and how they're currently administering it. I would speculate that their interpretations on some of those things might change over time or depending on other circumstances.
Yeah. But I also wonder what if we do an analysis and we find we've already reached the trigger point at Second and Oak signalization, then would any development at the waterfront be responsible for any part of that, since that's something that's already occurred? Seems like it was a short-term project in the first place, and it's still undone 10 years later.
Yeah. So I think what I can offer is a couple pieces of perspective from ODOT is a couple things. I think over the last 10 years, safety is typically their highest priority, and what they're really looking out for and want to avoid is vehicles queuing back onto the freeway at those ramp signals. What they don't want is someone to be rear-ended at a high speed. They do, ODOT as an agency does have mobility standards which they apply, which relate to, they don't use how long is a vehicle waiting, but it's essentially looking at how much capacity is being used up at an intersection. I would say over the last 10 years, they're taking a more holistic look at the transportation system and aren't maybe as focused on solely on mobility that they were 10 years ago. And they've been doing that through a few different policy efforts. Some are related to, in some cases, places are adopting alternate mobility standards when it's determined that it's in the best interest of the transportation system to not build just for the sake of being bigger. Because as you do so, there might be trade-offs with pedestrian safety, bicyclists or other users part of the system. So that's nothing specific, but I think that there is some hope and opportunity in those future discussions.
Garth, I had one point. We had talked about the possible need to come back in the summertime, do some additional traffic, sort of prove up those summer recreational numbers. Given what's going on, it's pretty unlikely, or it's unlikely that we're going to have a normal summer up here. So given those circumstances, we'll have to see how it plays out, but it may be that we won't be able to really get an accurate picture of summertime traffic until 2021.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll do our best at this point to estimate what we think that difference is, but yeah, we just won't be able to go out and collect the data directly.
Okay, I guess I'd suggest I think we have some really good update, Garth, and we have some direction. When do you think we would be able to come back to the commission, Garth? In end of May, early June?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Probably somewhere in the probably looking about 6 weeks out. I will jump ahead if we can go ahead just two more slides. I think this gets back to some of the things we've already talked about. Sorry, back one slide. So I think we hit on all these things already, but again, I talked a little bit about the current work plan, the work we've done to date, these scenarios we're going to be taking a look at. looking ahead to the future, there would be other potential steps that could be taken. As Michael mentioned, collecting more representative traffic counts to check some of the analysis that's been done. The city's been talking about updating their citywide transportation system plan, at which time that would likely come with an overall citywide model update as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this hinges also on coordination with ODOT as well. And so that's something that would be a future endeavor as well. But, all right, but that's the last of the slides I had. If there's any other questions, but it sounds like we got, as Michael mentioned, I think we got some good input on scenarios to take a look at.
Garth, thank you very much. I realize your study conditions got pulled out from underneath you.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing from you in the future.
All right.
That brings up Daryl. You want to talk about Steve?
So just real quick, so then Garth and Amanda, if you just want to click the leave meeting button there, then we'll move on to the next item. Okay, so then let me get back to the packet. And Daryl, is your connection okay?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay, we lost you for a couple minutes there, so I'll get to your memo and then we'll proceed with that presentation. So if you want to go ahead and do the intro.
Sure. Hi, commissioners. I'm really pleased tonight to be able to have Mike drawings. And oh, am I still there?
You are. You're just breaking up a little bit.
I'm sorry.
I think we might be in the process of losing Daryl. There you go.
Okay. Well, Mike Silas, if you can hear me, Mike Silas is with us tonight, and also ex-commissioner John Davies to talk about what we've been working on for the Steve Gates Remembrance Project. So if you want to dive in, Mike.
You guys want me to go ahead and start the presentation?
If you can hear me, yes. Is Mike there?
Let's see. Let me text him here. Yep, you just have to unmute yourself, Mike. I'll unmute you. There you go.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great.
Zoom out a little bit. So you
Well,
can
good
see
evening. So as Daryl was trying to say, we've been working for a number of months to do a meaningful memorial to Steve Gates. And I'm sure that everyone's aware of Steve's impact, not only in the city, but the community and the port, and specifically the waterfront. So what we were charged to do was to look at the area of the Nichols Basin, which we designed a couple of years ago, to look for a space that would be appropriate and honorable to Steve, but also that had some energy. This was not to be a kind of a solemn place, but a place that celebrates who he was and what he meant to the city. Next, please.
Okay. Figure out where I am.
There we go. So I was able to meet with Steve a number of times when we were doing Nichols Basin. I'm sure that many of you knew him very well and knew about his impact. We did some research into people that knew him and talked about him. And there were some key aspects that we thought was important to characterize in this space. One is his commitment to community, commitment to character, and just the basic energy that he brought to everything he did. So our attempt is to develop a space that brings those characteristics as we honor Steve. I hope everyone's familiar with the Nichols Basin. This is an aerial view looking down at the seating area just above the beach. The basin is to the right of the slide. And the space, for a number of reasons, was selected for the memorial. One is that it's available and possible within the current zoning. There was a need for new regulations and that sort of thing for another location. Secondly, people thought it was a nice space because it's looking at not only the water and the activity in the water, but at the beach and the community. And also it's accessible. So the path is an accessible grade and people can get there easily. So this was the site that was selected by the committee. We were asked to do a couple things. One, provide some shade. Another is to provide an interesting seating area, a place that people could gather. So for a shade device, we were quite inspired by using the windsurfing sail as a metaphor and as a form that could possibly build a shade over this space. I know it gets quite warm in the summer. There are a couple aspects that were also key to what we were doing here. One is not creating too much shelter or too much kind of barrier from being able to be seen from First Street. So it didn't become a place that became a camping zone or other things occurred there. So we want to make sure we're safe, but also very comfortable. So the idea of some kind of a device over the top that would make it a more friendly place and also emulate what Steve was about, we thought was a good idea. Next, please. So we looked at a variety of canopy ideas. The notion is that it would be a steel canopy. It wouldn't be a solid roof because we don't want to create that permanent kind of cover, but perhaps has some punched metal or other devices that would give some shade. It'd also be something you could see from a distance. It wouldn't be red, by the way. This is just studies.
Mm-hmm.
We were looking at a variety of materials. Where we are presently is some kind of aluminum or steel structure. Could have a punched metal over the top. These are a variety of ways of punching different kinds of steel to provide some sense of shade and actually an interesting pattern on the pavement. So where we've arrived is this idea of this form that was taken from a windsurfing sail. It isn't. The inspiration is there. A series of columns, steel columns, that would be located over the space, and it would provide, we think, some really nice shade in the afternoon over the space. So the existing bench, which was built a few years ago in the seating area, we had a lot of conversations with the committee about what's possible there and is it large enough? And the general feeling is it was too tight for gatherings and to really kind of imagine some kids being taught about the water or something else there to have a bigger gathering space. We didn't want to manipulate the new sidewalk, and actually there was a lot of conversation about how much of the wall to actually kind of manipulate. So we'll show you the idea of how to expand this seating area without removing all of the new improvements. One of the things we wanted to also do was create a little more comfort on a part of the wall. So perhaps there could be some wood or some other element that would be added to make it more comfortable for those that gather. So where we've arrived is the existing wall is in the front of the image. Part of that wall is removed on the left side, it'd be the south side. We've added some wood over the top of that wall and then created a second wall behind it. One of the things that people were interested in is this kind of tiering effect of the seating area. You can imagine if there's a gathering there that a number of people could sit and listen to a speaker or even a small performance. The other thing we thought was interesting is it felt like we could add a little more sense of community and gathering, a little more informality to the space. It felt pretty static with just the two arched walls. So we're suggesting that these materials, these are pre-manufactured elements that can be brought in and place within that zone to create more variety of seating. So what we're proposing is to bring some of those in as well. You can see the great difference between the two walls. There is a step up, which we think would be great because then you could kind of sit as if there was a gathering, you could kind of all participate. And we thought the informality of these seat stools would really be interesting to people and be very attractive. The other thing we understand is in the summer, a lot of people come and gather here. And if there's one group, they pretty well take it over just by the scale of it. By having more room, we think there'd be a better community space for a variety of people to use. So this is again, that seating area as it stands today with the beach and First Street beyond, just trying to give you a sense of kind of the location and the way it works. The other thing we've been asked to do is to try to buffer some of the wind coming from the west. And we're very cognizant of the idea of making sure this thing is still visually available. So our suggestion is that we add some soil behind that wall, between the wall and the pavement, and create an interesting kind of sculptural element out of the topography that could start to buffer some of that wind as it comes down that edge. This is a grading plan. So the red lines are 1 foot contours. So you can see that the existing seating area is about elevation 90. We could mound, we think in an artistic way, up towards First Street and get up to about 95. So we have the ability to kind of undulate the grade and actually create a more interesting place, we think, even beyond the edge of the seating. And this is kind of how it would look and feel. You wouldn't have the white lines, of course, but we're just trying to show the contouring behind the seat area. The other issue was how do we give messages about not only Steve, but what he meant to the community and the whole notion of what happens on your waterfront, which is really exciting. Those bronze plaques on the right of the seat walls, the idea was to tell Steve's story and the story of the waterfront as it's evolved to date. So perhaps those could have some interesting information so people understood both those topics. We also think it'd be interesting on those seat stones to perhaps use some sandblasted words about kind of what Steve was about, but also what the place is about. It's about community, it's about energy, it's about bringing people together. So we could go through a process and decide what those words were, but we thought it might add another layer of interest. This is an example of some plaques we did years ago at Portland State University, and we thought this kind of idea of the message and an image on the seats themselves could be interesting. So this is an example. So that is the proposal. The proposal is to retain the existing walkway connection to the beach, the majority of the wall that was just built a couple years ago, add a second wall and slight elevation change, some seat stools, and a canopy over the top that would provide shade, and then perhaps some grading beyond to the west to give it a little bit of wind buffer, but also just more visual interest. So that is the proposal. We've met with the committee a number of times. I know John is on the phone somewhere. I think they're excited about the proposal. The idea was to present it to the commission, get your thoughts, and then their next step is to start to think about fundraising. Questions?
Yeah, Mike, I like the concept quite a lot. This is John Everett, and the one question is, you're not proposing a glass or a transparent roof, are you?
No, that would be a punched metal. So we want to make sure it doesn't protect frankly from the rain. We're just trying to get some shade. So that's just shown in a simple punched metal. And there's still a number of studies to go through about the structure of this, and it is a sail, and you have a lot of wind, so you want to make sure that it's well engineered. But yeah, that's basically sheets of metal that have punched holes in them.
And your coverage 100%? Are you proposing partial coverage?
It's partial coverage. So I would say it's about 2/3. The other thing about the sun is that usually, you know, it does come straight down at noon, but the sun that we're trying to protect from, frankly, is probably later in the day. So having it a little bit to the west edge of this, it should provide some shade from a kind of angular, if you will, as the sun is setting in the west.
Did you guys go through, I mean, I like the berm in the back to help protect the wind, but did you guys vet out having a back along the rear of it to further protect from the wind, or is the intent to keep it open?
No, I think we should keep it open. One of the discussions was, should we add more trees back there? And I should have added those to the illustration. There are some trees there today that will have to be relocated. There could be some more trees. We'd be very cognizant of not creating a visual barrier from First Street to this location, because I think it's just going to potentially attract uses you don't want there. So we think it's kind of a dual-edged sword of trying to get some break from the wind, but not creating kind of a hiding place. So the addition would be some additional trees to the west.
That kind of ties into my question. Well, I had actually a comment and a question. Have you given consideration to lighting at night?
We've talked about it a little bit. There hasn't been a decision made about how to do it. There's bollard lights right now along the walkway. It's nice low key lighting. Parks, we do a lot of parks. It's really a decision of how much you want to invite people in at night. There are some parks that turn the lights off on purpose in the evening just to say we're not open. So there was some discussion, but nothing definitively kind of described. My kind of message to the committee is, if you like this, do it very subtly, and do it very elegantly.
Well, that ties right into my question. And my question is for the committee member who I think is on the call, John, if you're still here. Is this what you think? Do you think Steve would like this? Is this what you guys have in mind? I mean, is this what you want? And you think would be the best thing we can do here?
Yeah, Ben, thanks. I think it's a great solution. We went around for a couple different ideas, and Mike did a great job pulling us back around to keep the elements in there. And I think Mike has really come up with I think something that's going to be well used by the community, but that also honors Steve in a really subtle way. So I think the subcommittee that we created, which was really just 5 people, AJ, Scott Rainier, Kelly Dave, and Todd Clay, we were all very happy with it.
Okay.
John, has the family seen this?
Yes. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not, but they might be watching this evening from the YouTube feed. But yes, they were sent all of the content, and they were really excited about it.
Right.
If I might, I think what we're looking for tonight is kind of some direction from the commission. There's a lot of details, as Mike and you guys started pointing out, and we have already developed a list of maybe 10 other details that really have to be thought through. It's probably most appropriate to kind of work with staff on that and see what works. I know there's concerns about wood with maintenance. There's possibility of lighting, but there's extra expense. There's a whole question of how much expense is involved in building this that we really don't still know.
By way of direction, I think it's going in a great direction. I like it a lot. I think it does.
Well, I think it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, really perfect job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I think Mike's done a great job as well. And so what we're looking for tonight is the thumbs up the commissioners to be able to let the committee move forward with developing plans to put together something similar to what you've seen.
Yeah, I think we have consensus there. Hobie, what's your opinion? All right. And Ben, you weighed in. I think everybody's in favor.
Great.
That's great.
Yeah, good work, John.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
Commission.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thanks.
So,
thank you.
Mike and John, you can go ahead and leave the meeting unless you want to watch it
Okay.
more for entertainment
No, we're
purposes.
fine. Thank you very much.
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Mike.
And
Yep.
I will go back to the packet. Just one moment. Bear with me here.
Okay,
Okay, so that brings us to page 105 in your packets.
that's you, Michael, with preliminary bridge load rating.
Well, from some fun stuff to some not so fun stuff.
Hmm.
This is really just an update, what I know now, what I think is coming, and what the commission should be aware of. But pretty self-evident from the memo that we've got a coming reduction in the load rating for the bridge. Now, I'm going to caveat that a little bit in a minute, but basically, for a lot of reasons that are described there, we're looking at a load rating analysis that is really out of our hands. It's an ODOT contractor, David Evans Associated engineering firm that follows protocols that are established by FHWA and ODOT to evaluate the bridge. And it's a pretty detailed assessment based on a look at the gusset plates and look at structural calculations at various different junctures. But if you scroll down a little bit, this is the sum of what we're facing. Current weight versus proposed weight. The ODOT classifies vehicles, and most states do roughly in the same way, into these different categories. The first three really get at typical vehicles, the ones you'll see on the highway, on the interstate, in various forms. And of course, they go higher than 6 axles, but these are typical configurations. And I want to, if you want me to, we can look at those briefly, but in your packet, there are these characterized with dimensions and further description. But the ones that impact the traffic on the bridge, and I think the traffic that we care most about, fruit and logs and concrete mixers and dump trucks and construction related material, they really relate. The first relates to the 3 and the 5 axle rig. I'm no expert in fruit hauling and the different configurations, but I know that when you get up to a 5 axle vehicle, a 3S2, which would be a typical semi with a flatbed trailer fully loaded with bins, that gets pretty close to or over what the current weight limit is. In the worst condition, I assume to be with log trucks, and those would also fall under the 5 axle configuration. And those haul at 80,000 pounds or 88,000 pounds typically, and they don't want to carry or drive or haul underweight. So those different categories of commodities, local commodities in particular, that transit the bridge, staff wanted to get further information about impacts. So if you scroll down a little bit more, in your memo was the summary of the interviews that I've had so far, and it's fruit, perhaps not as much of an impact because it's not quite so important that they haul at full weight. It costs more, it's a hassle, but you make another run if you have to. I'm more concerned there, and I don't know enough yet. I've talked to different orchardists, but if they're using a Type 3 vehicle, that could be more of a problem than the larger rigs that haul fruit. And Ben, weigh in because you're much more knowledgeable than I am. Log trucks, that's a big deal, and it's a big deal not to the mill because they'll take logs from any direction. It's a big deal to the JIPO logger, to the supplier that's taken the timber from the cut site and transiting or driving it to the mill. the mill, and I talked to SDS at length about it, they weigh their rigs when they come in, so they know if someone's hauling heavy, but hauling heavy is meaning over 80,000 or 88,000 pounds. And so there is a sort of a built-in mechanism. They will tell their drivers not to haul overweight on the state highway. And most log trucks have an onboard weight scale, so they know how heavy they are. But for those operators, they want to make a run to the mill. They want to haul as heavy as possible. And so that could have a big impact on logs that are, especially going to SDS from the south, which is less frequent, but potentially logs that are hauled to the south from cut sites in Washington that are going to Mount Hood Forest Products. And then a bigger deal, or also a big deal, are concrete mixers. I talked to Hood River Sand and Gravel, and if you look at the configurations on the list of different classified vehicles, it's those specialized hauling vehicles where you have a concrete mixer, and there's no way it's going to be under the weight limit if it's probably without much concrete in it, much less a fully load. And so from their standpoint, that would have a big impact on their ability to deliver materials to construction sites on the Washington side of the river. And then I also talk a little bit about the semi trucks, which we really have very little or no way to understand how heavy they are, or if they're going to exceed the weight limit or not. So I don't expect this to change much, but I want to caveat by saying we've asked our bridge engineer, Mark Libby, to weigh in, and their structural engineer has looked at the calculations that David Evans came up with. And what they're seeing are numbers that are really close to the break point being a positive thing, just under what it would be to allow the current weight limit to stay in place. And so what we don't yet know, and I can't answer right now, is one, whether ODOT would say, hey, that's pretty close enough. Okay, we're fine. Or alternatively, excuse me.
Hey, Michael.
Excuse me.
Running the PM oil, huh? Or you got a meeting tonight?
Yeah, I'm on it. So one is whether they would make an allowance for that close, but just a little bit under. Or second, and I don't know the answer to this yet either, whether there's certain structural changes we can make, certain investment we can make in the bridge that to buttress up or provide additional structural support at the key locations that would allow us to maintain the current weight limit. It might be that there are some fairly low expense items that we can do that can overcome a barrier for at least some vehicle classifications. So that's another step that we need to take and come back to you with. But I will say that the analysis done by DEA is under review by ODOT now, and they expect that them to answer, or the ODOT to answer whether they approve it or not within a month. And so this might come up at us pretty fast. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that in a way, we know that heavy vehicles cause inordinate damage to the bridge. We know the deck welding that's going on right now is in part caused by heavy vehicles going at a high rate of speed. And so if we're up there at 80 or 40 tons, 80,000 pound limit, and people are, we know, running over that, especially at speed, that's going to continue to impact the bridge. So one could also argue that this is appropriate, and although it might be painful for certain commodity classes, that it's really will increase the longevity of the bridge, certainly the bridge deck. So that's the summary. The memo is pretty detailed, and we have the attachments to it that let you see, so you can see what the different vehicle classes are like. We'll continue to reach out to businesses and try to characterize the impacts better and also to get that feedback from the bridge engineer about things we might be able to do about it. That's my presentation.
Michael, I have a question. So you said about speed. So if we reduced the speed limit, would that help with things or not be relevant?
Yeah, the speed is an issue that we're always fighting. The speed limit on the bridge is 25 miles an hour. People routinely go 35 or 40. And so either whether it's because of the weight limit or because of speed, there's just very little way that we can enforce or prevent that from happening. We've looked at, and we will look at again, literally some form of speed bump at the plaza. It may not be a real speed bump. ODOT wouldn't allow that, but those raised strips that provide a real kind of rattle for vehicles can help. We installed the "You're going this fast" sign up there a couple of years ago. We know that without the toll plaza in operation, without a gate, people are really charging through the toll plaza. Just very, very little we can do on speed to enforce it. So I wish there were other things we could do, but they're very limited.
Michael, might want to mention what's going on to Hood River County, the forestry department there. A lot of their sales go across probably our bridge and some across Bridge of the Gods, and that could affect their bid values on their future sales if fully loaded trucks aren't able to get across.
You know, I
Sort
didn't.
of a heads up.
Who do you still know the contact there? Who the forester would be? Should I go to?
Yeah, Doug TC's is the county forester director.
Okay. So I would, unless there's any other question, we'll have an update to the status of this at our next meeting, spring planning. Sorry, budget committee meeting.
And you mentioned it, Michael, but I'm particularly interested, of course, in understanding what kind of impact, which of our local industries are the most impacted by weight reduction.
Okay. Ben,
Ben is probably to a lot of orchardists, but I talked to one today and they just said that the 25 to 24 on the 3, what is it? What class is it? On the type 3, he said that that's the majority of orchardists up in the valley. And so it would be impactful because it removes like 2.5 bins per load. And
it's a type 3 with a pivot axle is what you're talking about. And we really don't address that in this presentation. I was going to ask that offline, but it's a 3 axle with a pivot is what we need to think about as well.
So that would be a 3-axle vehicle.
We listed as the straight, don't we? I'm not looking at that. I can't see it on here anymore, but is it a straight axle or is it a pivot, or do we even, I see a 5 with a pivot, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't mention the pivot. It's just a 3-axle single unit.
Well, as long are 3 axles all, we're gonna think of 3 axles all the same. That's an easier question.
Yeah.
Okay. And the weight limit on that was proposed to be what?
Well, it's been reduced to the current is 25 ton. It goes to 24 ton.
I can't remember on those, but that's right on the borderline. I think those run 25, 26 a lot.
Yeah, that's only a 1 ton drop. It's so 48,000 GVW, and the legal weight limit in Oregon for those vehicles is 25 ton. So
a ton of pears is 2 bins, a ton of cherries is 4. So that's just, and cherries have to get there that day. You don't have a choice. Pears can't be taken there after 4 o'clock, and no one loves a load of pears sitting in the yard overnight. So 2-4 here all day long adds up pretty fast.
Okay.
So that's the one, that's what I'm considering right there during harvest.
And those 3-axle vehicles, they'd be running at full weight whenever they could, I presume.
Right, but also wanting to stay within the legal limit.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. I'll follow up. There'll be some more an update at our next meeting.
I mean, do we have any voice in that, in discussing our local agriculture and our local need about, do we have any clout with ODOT in saying, hey, we know that this is what was the proposed weight, and maybe some of these vehicles, we might have to accept their proposed weight limit, but maybe let's look at specifically our 3 axles and what kind of wiggle room do we have? I just don't know what kind of voice we have, or if it's totally handed down to us.
You know, I'm no expert in this area, but I will say very little. This is based on specific standards that are promulgated by FHWA as applied to a specific structure based on specific structural calculations, and it is what it is. But that might allow us to focus on an area where some specific spending on an improvement to get a weight limit up would help a certain commodity or certain vehicle class.
Or if there could be some kind of, if that was price prohibitive, perhaps a waiver for a certain period of time, which could be defined by the port in conjunction with ODOT.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I've got a good contact at ODOT, and I'll follow up on these questions.
Thank you.
I would be looking at additional sources to get information from, especially from the orchard community. I've talked to a couple, and so I've gotten good input there, but I think I went to Mike Doak at Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers, and they really couldn't release any information.
Michael, they could do a packing house meeting, which they have quarterly, each of them do for all of their growers. If that would be helpful at any time. Most growers, my family goes to the duck wall meeting because that's where we take our fruit. Most growers are there. If that'd be a good source of information for the port at any time, I'd be happy to take you.
Well, tell me I'm wrong, but I think we're mostly focused on farmers that are going north to Underwood.
A good amount of people here take their fruit that direction. I'm just talking for knowledge on what trucks are we driving, what weights, what everything, which are all going to be relatively similar. It doesn't matter where they take their fruit. And a lot of these growers that take one commodity to a packing house in Hood River take another one to Underwood, depending on the time of year. A lot of them work with both because they're growing cherries and pears, and so there's growers going everywhere. If it's helpful, it comes up. That's all.
My contact at Underwood is Wade Pickering.
Brad.
So I've got, and I know him, so that's a good connection there. And there's a guy named Harry Harvey who's the semi-retired, but he's been with SDS for a long time. So I've got good connections from that end of it. But I see your point, just having a conversation and getting the input on various vehicles and hauling weights and times and such would help. Okay. All right.
Okay. Fred, how about the electronic tolling launch update?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we've been moving along pretty quickly here. So one of the things we are designing is the website and the ability to go in and make a payment. If you cross the bridge and you know that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and pay before they ever receive a letter, they can do that and basically not have to pay any administrative fee. And so the website will be sort of broken down into, you know, Breeze by customers and a non-Breeze by customer. And then we go to if you say, I'm not a Breeze by customer, then it goes into like a separate page that gives different types of options for that customer, whether they want to make a payment, whether they want to become a Breeze by customer, and sort of you know, so it gives different options. So we've designed the website, and we're still the design is complete. Now we're putting the website together as well as the programming together. Basically, you either are going to pay based on your license plate, or if you have a letter, then you basically put that invoice number in and you can pay that way. Or if you get a second letter that has a late fee, you can pay as well. Whether you get either letter, you can go ahead and waive the administrative fee for $3 per trip and just become a Breeze by customer. And the way the system is, it will take them through, they go, you know, they click next and they go next and then create a account. They put the money on the Breeze by account and it brings them back to make the payment for the tolls and the fees are waived. So we're trying to make it as idiot proof as possible, but we're also looking at, you know, we've looked at other tolling agencies and trying to just pick sort of a hodgepodge of the best attributes of each agency and then what's realistic for our time period. Trying to design a system so we can go live May 1st. So everything is looking that it will. So we haven't hit a glitch yet that won't. The biggest issue is messaging. And so we have placed the ads, you'll see them tomorrow, and they'll run for the next 3 weeks in our newspaper. We have finalized the last language with regard to our letters with Jerry and Bill. And so we're pretty much, we're looking at just making sure we complete our testing. And we have our interface with Duncan right now, and we are about ready to test that as well. So everything is it's getting crammed in here in this last week, and the weekends are every day. So we have been working on the weekends just to make sure we can get this done. So we're using every single day that we have. So anyways,
Okay, Fred, sir, if I understand, if you cross the bridge and you know you did that, you can go to our website now and put your license plate number in and just pay the toll. And you only pay $2. And at the same time, get an option to open a Breeze by account.
yeah, it will sort of cue you in. You put your license plate and it'll grab the license plate information and where you can pay. And it will also allow you, sort of prompt you if you want to go and become a Breeze by customer.
And even if you've got a letter at a 7-day line and you know, so we've already spent the money to find out who you are so we can send you a letter.
Yeah.
You can still go to our website and we'll forgive all the extra charges if you open a Breeze by account.
Well, they'll have to pay the tolls, but we'll waive the administrative fee, correct?
We weren't able to do that even last week, were we?
And just to clarify, it's not live now. You said the word now, but it will be ready before May 1st.
No, I don't think he said now. I mean, when we were talking last week, we were still trying to solidify the design. So it was still fluid last week, but it's pretty much baked right now. So we're moving forward with the design we have.
And I've had a lot of questions from people. So the first Breeze by is no charge. Is that correct?
the first breeze by, when you, well, they have to put
Transponder.
$20 down, but their transponder is free, correct?
Okay, thank you.
That's excellent work, Fred.
Well, we got to test it. So, so we'll probably get done with this programming probably Thursday, and probably over the weekend we'll be testing. So we'll be, we're pushing it to May 1st. So we'll use every single hour of the day between now and May 1st. So, but once you get the design done, it's pretty well operational at that point. So just to give you a heads up here. So May 1st doesn't mean the letters go out May 1st. So the letters, we wait 7 days to collect all that information of people crossing. Then we send that file to the DMVs, whether it's to Duncan or to Oregon DMV. They in turn, at least with Oregon DMV, we've already done the test. It's in production. We can pull that information right out of their DMV production files and bring, it's John Everett and you live somewhere in Hood River, and it shows your vehicle, it shows all that information. So once we get that information, we actually go through a validation just to make sure that the toll collector didn't transpose a number. If you could transpose a number ending like 512 and it's 521, it just so happens 521, there's a license plate and a person that has that. So we validate that one last time to make sure that the toll collector didn't make a mistake. And then once we scrub it, we put it on the letters and send them out. And that part is pretty fast, not the validation, but once the file is validated, it runs pretty quick. I mean, it's done not in a day. I mean, we're talking an hour or so. That's it. So, so it's that part is pretty good. The one piece is this validation. So we have a crew with 2 ships that sit back there and they validate the license plate numbers coming from the booth. 7 days later, they are validating what the DMVs are sending us. But there is but the database is smart. We've programmed it so that any file coming across that says, John, whatever your license plate number is, I don't know if you know it, but once we validate it and you cross it, we know who you are. We know your vehicle, we know your VIN, we know that. So we don't have to validate that any further. We just need to make sure that what the camera says is exactly what was on the vehicle. So what I'm trying to say is we're not going to have a lot of labor continuously, but we will have a lot of labor right when we begin this process. So.
Okay, then refresh me, Fred. If I'm a cash customer, just because I don't have a computer or I don't like them, whatever, I can come to the window, put a $10 bill in an envelope with my license plate number, and that buys me 10 crossings?
5.
Well, you don't have an account. If it's 10 bucks, it's $2 a crossing, so it's 5 crossings. But
why wouldn't I could have an account and fund it with cash, right?
Yes, you can. I mean, a Breeze By account, absolutely, absolutely. We have people that do that all the time. They do exactly what you said. If you have a Breeze By account, they drop money in and say, this is my Breeze By account. We put it on their account.
And then the crossing's $1.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we're meeting the community's request to make sure we keep this electronic toll in place and they get that benefit. And for those people that, let's say that you don't have any mobile device, you have no PC, then you would call and we would basically come in, or you could fill it out. You can fill out an application right outside the front office and dump it into the Dropbox, and we'll put your system, we'll have it go live, send you a transponder. It has instructions to where to put the transponder, and then you go.
It's one of the things that we'll be sure to include. Tomorrow, we're going to send out another press release and add a little bit to the ad now that we have more of the details figured out. I mean, the main message is that the very best deal is to use BreezeBuy and that it's free to open an account. Your first transponder is free. Your money never expires. There's no monthly fee or anything. And you don't need a bank account to open a BreezeBuy account. You don't even need an ID. You just need a vehicle with a license plate and a mailing address. And Marcella and Melissa and Yana have been just powerhouses this whole week, opening up a huge rush of new accounts and getting those transponders out the door as quickly as possible, because everybody needs their transponder before May 1st. So the next press release we'll be sending out tomorrow will have a lot more of that detail that, yes, there's 7 days to avoid that $3 fee, which is a big sticker shock for everybody. But really, even with that 7 days, BreezeBuy is the best deal. Why pay twice as much when you don't have to? So we're going to really continue to try to urge everybody to get their transponder and pay the lowest tolls possible forever and never get that bill.
Yeah, so the customer has several options open to them to not pay a $3 administrative fee. They can get the letter and they can still not pay it by just becoming a BreezeBuy customer. And even if they get the second letter, they can still not pay the administrative fee if they become a BreezeBuy customer. So there's ample opportunity for our community to get onto BreezeBuy and pay a toll that's 50% lower.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. How do we get word if I'm someone passing through one time and I come across the bridge? How do I know that I can go online and pay $2 and avoid what's coming down the road if I don't do it? How do we engage that person that's not a community member but passing through?
You want me to take that, Fred?
No, I can, you can add to it. So we do have signage. And so let's just say the customer doesn't see the signage, which is very possible. And so they go home to, let's say, New Mexico, and lo and behold, they get a bill. Let's say they get a $5 bill, and they can either pay it, and let's say it's after, because they got the bill, right? They have several options. Naturally, they could call. They could pay the $5, or they can say, hey, I might come back there. They could always be a BreezeBuy customer, have a transponder sent to them, and have their $3 fee waived, and they only pay the $2 at the end of the day. But they have some, they have to fill out a form, their name, their address, so forth, so on. But if they wanted to, if they were never coming back, yeah, there could be a situation where they would call the office and we'd have to take a look at the situation. If it's out of state, we could, actually waive the ancillary fee if they were objecting to a certain point. But we do have signage. We hope that they look at it, but that doesn't mean they will.
And the signage isn't installed yet, and that is the challenge. It's a really complex message to get across with a sign when you're driving 20 miles an hour past it. So that's what I'm wrestling with right now. But so the plan is, if you can visualize it, we don't have pictures to show you, but at each approach is and be adding to the top of each of those signs with a message that says, I haven't figured out the wording perfectly yet, but it'll say COVID-19, cash payment suspended, pay online within 7 days at portofhoodriver.com, or get a pay by plate type bill in the mail. So we need to disclose that if they wait the bill, they'll get that $3 fee. In addition to the cash toll big billboard size signs at each approach, Then there will be a smaller version of that exact same sign attached to the toll plaza as you drive by, trying to make it really short, something you can grasp at 10 miles per hour. And Fred has also ordered a second electronic reader board that we are hoping to position before May 1st on the Washington approach, to just announce that tolling resumes May 1st and to get Breeze By now for the lowest rate.
So yeah, that electronic message board will be here tomorrow. So we'll test it out and test out the location over on the Washington side.
One thing we didn't mention is we're designing kind of a marketing insert that will go with each of the bills that really explains step by step. You got this bill, you can lower your bill by setting up Breeze By and how to do that.
So Commissioner Merriweather, I don't know if we explained your question, but was it close or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I understand the way it's going to work. There's absolutely no reason that anyone that is local that uses that bridge frequently ought to be on Breeze By now. So I must admit I have somewhat limited sympathy with regard to that. But there are people that use it very infrequently or from out of the area, tourists, if they come back, which I assume they will. That's going to be a complicated, difficult thing to figure out, and it just is. But I think you're doing everything you can, and I think we ought to go forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, the caveat is the system really was designed for the toll facility up there. And that facility was designed to have toll collectors in it.
Yeah.
So, we're taking a system and sort of moving away from its original design, but it'll be able to do it. At the end of the day, we're going to be able to do something that's probably a first in Oregon, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to your comment, David, a lot of the local folks do have that misunderstanding that you need a bank account to get a Breeze By. And so we really are trying to reinforce to people that you don't. And if you want to top up your Breeze By balance with cash, you can go to work Monday through Friday, and Friday night, plop that cash in the Dropbox and let us know your license plate number and you'll be fine. But the best deal is Breeze By. And it's the lowest possible way to do it. One other thing that I'm working on this week really hard is to get Spanish language press release out and get some information to Radio Tierra. Marcella has been helping me with that. One of the things we want to get out to everybody is that all of our frontline customer service folks are totally fluent English, Spanish, and they do just a really great job. We have a lot, like Fred said, we have a lot of customers that are cash-based customers, and our frontline staff does a great job helping those folks set up an account and maintain it and pay those lowest toll rates. So, they're welcome here, and you don't need a bank account. You don't need an ID. You just need a license plate and a mailing address, and we're ready to help.
Well, I just want to say I thank you for all of the messaging that you have done. I, for one, have gotten a lot of phone calls and emails about the question about the bank account and all of that. So, with Emily being here, I hope she takes the opportunity to really detail all of these wonderful points of how easy it is to pay stuff before you get that $5 fine. And the other big message that I'd like to hopefully push out is that I've gotten is that, we did this intentionally to save our toll booth workers. I mean, there were probably other options we could have looked at and gone forward with that would have essentially eliminated our toll booth people, but this is to protect our people in the long term, to keep them as our greeters as they enter and exit our state.
there were quite a lot of questions about whether or not this was a permanent change. And a lot of questions asking for a date certain that this would end. And of course, you know, this virus is giving nobody a date certain. There's a lot of discussion, as Michael will report, about Governor Brown putting some information out there about what steps would have to take for her to lift, for instance, the PPE restrictions that are the reason we right now don't have cash handling toll takers. But there's a lot of concern. I was actually really heartwarming how many people in the community were concerned that the toll takers were losing their jobs, and will this be a permanent thing? So, you know, obviously we can't tell everybody when it's going to end because nobody knows, but there's a lot of people concerned about whether or not this is a permanent thing that will go on forever, or is this just a coronavirus thing?
So Commissioner Everett or anyone have any other questions or?
Yeah, okay, so absent questions. Thanks, Fred. Genevieve, that was great. And it's really, again, that's excellent work in a short period of time.
We'll know by the next meeting whether everything is okay or not.
Yeah, next meeting could have a different story. And then Michael, the director's report.
Kevin is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to submit my written report, unless there were some questions in there. The one thing I do want to draw your attention to is I'll be bringing a more formal request to apply for a federal U.S. Department of Transportation grant referred to as BUILD. So it's very similar to the infra grant, though I do think it's probably a more exact program for us to get hopefully some success. It's still very competitive, but I do plan on bringing that to you at your next meeting. But just wanted to give you a heads up on that, and all the details are in the report. Other than that, are there any other questions on anything in the written report?
Kevin, the only thing, I don't have any questions, but I meant to call you and say that I'd like to hear from a more thorough representation of the Bi-State Bridge Working Group.
Sure, yeah, just what they're working on, and you'd like to maybe see a copy of the agenda, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and maybe next, I don't think this meeting, but next, where we'll have another meeting with the group, and it'll be a post-COVID meeting. And maybe we'll have start to get a regular representation of how that's developing.
Yeah, and just for the balance of the commission, so the next Bi-State Working Group meeting is scheduled for this coming Friday at 9 o'clock. It is going to be a video conference. The main agenda item will be Steve Siegel. We've carved out about 90 minutes for him to do the first presentation on the governance ownership evaluation. So he's going to have about 6 or 7 of those over the next calendar year. So I'll continue to give you a more detailed accounting of what comes out of those meetings.
Because we have yet to even discuss, I mean, as we had Steve Siegel come in and start to engage the question of governance. I mean, I guess the very next thing is how do we keep our commission in lockstep with governance for our bridge?
Absolutely, and I think yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, I can certainly, you know, post Steve's presentations on the website, or just kind of give a brief synopsis of them. You know, the weeks of the board meetings, probably once a month. And then Christie's been attending, and obviously you, John, you're the representative, so you can add some value to that. But yeah, I'll do a little once a month. I'll do a little synopsis on the board meeting, and then you and Christie can maybe add some value to that.
Yeah, that could be a good format.
Cool. Okay.
Okay.
Stay well.
All right. Any other questions for Kevin? We'll move on to Michael with the director's report.
So I just want to highlight a few items. There's a lot of information in the report, but May 5th is our budget committee meeting. So as with the spring planning, we'll start that at 1:30, so everyone has time to make a lunch. And this will be the similar challenge with the budget committee members now participating in the forum, as you know, as a separate standing group for that particular meeting and making a decision about the budget. A lot of continuing work, as you can expect with the COVID situation. I've tried to list some of the things that are ongoing there. I will highlight the couple of things. One is the governor has released a high-level framework plan, which is anticipating the point at which Oregon will start opening up again. It's fairly detailed. It's based on the national guidelines that have been released. What they're doing right now is going through and making presentations and providing updates on the framework plan right now. And there will be a large meeting, Zoom meeting tomorrow with Nate Stites presenting information about the update. Then there's a week of consultation with the different business sectors about what issues and challenges they have for opening up. And then there'll be more details of a framework plan release, but effectively this is something that will be triggered based on data, as you've heard a lot. And it looks like we'll be have specific sectors that are opened up first, as also you'd expect, with other sectors waiting or lagging. And it looks like, at least this preliminary report is, recommendation is that may be based somewhat on county specific decisions, where in the county commission or board of commissioners or whatever governance form in the different counties would then would assert, along with their medical leadership in that county, that they have met certain standards to go to the first level. And then there's a certain threshold or timeline that they have to meet. And if they come back in 14 days and they've still met it, then they can make a recommendation to the governor to go on to the next level, further release and allow for more activity. And they would need to receive the governor's approval for that recommendation to move on through the three major steps. So obviously that has an impact on our local business community and likewise tenants and port buildings. One of the issues we're challenged with right now is just the demand as the weather improves and warmer temperatures, the demand for people to get down to the water and to utilize the waterfront in various ways. So the messaging there has been challenging, and there have been, we've received input and local law enforcement has received input from citizens that are either reporting activity that they think is inappropriate or that are suggesting that people should be allowed to do more on the waterfront. So you have a sort of a split vote on that. But I just want to emphasize that right now the message is the waterfront is closed, the trail is open, and the launch ramp is open. But having said that, we have not yet closed the gates at the Hook and the Spit and the Swim Beach. In part because so far there's been the sort of natural dispersal and the low level of activity, but there have been a couple of occasions, especially this last Sunday, when there was warmer temperatures, the wind came up and people started to access the water and begin to congregate. So I've been in touch with Chief Holste, and we have been, and Genevieve and Daryl and I have discussed what the messaging is here. This is pretty much a day-to-day decision, or at least we're looking at it constantly. And as we look ahead to the warmer months, if there still hasn't been a release of a release for more recreational activity, then we'll have to make a more specific decision to close off or at least lock the gates in certain areas. I was told by the county administrator this morning that it appears as though the county board is looking, and it could be in the near term, to open up the county access again for the county forest. And that could be a good thing because then people have an outlet to go other places, and it could be challenging for us because the expectation that the waterfront is open, should be open, may increase. So it's we're working on this and dealing with it day to day. Personnel committee, we haven't yet locked onto a time and a date, but I'm suggesting the personnel committee meet at 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 23rd. And I guess I'd looking to Commissioner Shepherd, if we keep it under an hour, would a time frame on Thursday work for you?
I'll be there, Michael, yes.
So we'll set up a Zoom meeting for that. Highlighted just a couple of other things. The city, although I was not in attendance, and frankly, I didn't know it was on the agenda, but the city council did have a discussion, as I point out in the report, about the storm line and how to deal with that. And I spoke with Will Norris, the finance manager, the next day. It looks like, and he was fairly certain that they're moving away from an LID formation approach and rather looking to utilize the remaining tax increment capacity to pay the balance of and the majority of the total funding need for the stormline replacement. Okay, did everyone hear that last part?
No.
No? So Genevieve said I was breaking up there. I don't know why. So I'm not sure where to go back to, but what I was saying is that the city council has looked at the situation relative to how to pay for the storm line upgrade or relocation. And they appear to be have focused on utilizing the full amount of tax increment funding, or tax increment capacity, to pay the balance and the majority of that, the amount needed for that. Now that's assuming that the state grant still comes through, and given where the state's gonna land financially with the COVID situation, it's possible that they will not be able to fund that commitment they made for a $1.7 million contribution. But right now, it looks like, and Will Norris, the city finance manager, has affirmed that they're going in the direction of full utilization of tax increment. I just point out that that's certainly means that funding would not be available in the future for Lot 1 infrastructure. But on the other hand, it solves some pretty significant challenges with formation of an LID and that approach. And I guess I'd look to Commissioner Strike and Merriweather if you've had any further discussion about that or any update on that from council to the URA board.
Michael, I haven't, this is Commissioner Strike. I haven't talked to Will in some time, so I haven't been in touch with him.
And I heard about this when I read your report. So yeah, I didn't have any knowledge that the council was talking about that.
I found I was one of the interested parties in that LID, obviously. I found out about it a couple of days ago and heard the same as you just reported, that direction is away from LID.
Good. I guess the last thing I guess I turned to Fred. Fred's been tracking the traffic numbers on the bridge and has an update for you on where we're at.
So yeah, we've been, the last time we discussed, we were down about 30% on our traffic.
You guys might want to wait 1 minute.
Okay.
I think a whole bunch of us got booted off the meeting, including me, and we're waiting for folks to reconnect. At this moment, we have a quorum if Christy is actually connected.
I'm here.
I think she's trying to, and I think we've lost John Everett.
Are we ready?
There's Jerry back. John, are you still connected?
Yes, I don't think I ever lost connection. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you. It might just, so I think you can proceed.
So at our last meeting, we were discussing how the traffic volume has went down about 30% Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, it was, down 50% or more. Well, it's been clicking back up. Some days are only about 10 to 12% below last year. It's usually Monday and Tuesday. And then the rest of the week it starts to, it's still less than last year, but it's less, around 26, 28%, not 30% or more. So I'm seeing an uptick, a slight uptick in traffic compared to the last time we had our board meeting. So
Well, that's actually good news, Fred.
yeah, it is.
Sorry, everybody, I'm catching up after getting booted off. Which topic are we on?
What did you say?
You're really breaking up, Genevieve.
I don't know if the reception's better in my office, Jen. You can feel free to use that.
President Everett, might I suggest a 5-minute break while we figure this out and everybody can use the restroom or get a snack?
Yeah, that works for me. Let's take a recess for 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 7:15.
Hey, Fred, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Kevin, are you on? Guess not. So all of a sudden, we're having trouble with the meeting room Wi-Fi. Genevieve can't get on. And if I move back, so it might be that there's two of us on this meeting room Wi-Fi, but if I move back into my office, then the two of us are on a weaker Wi-Fi system. So Genevieve might have to come in here. We still have a bunch of meeting to go. Yeah, I'm on, Genevieve. Hey, Ben, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Michael, I hear you just fine.
All right.
Thanks for doing that at 10 o'clock on Thursday. It helps me a ton.
Okay. John, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. You're fine.
Kevin, you can? That's good. We had a real problem with the meeting room Wi-Fi all of a sudden. Genevieve can't get on even now.
Huh. Kevin, when is isn't the bi-state meeting Thursday as well?
No, we just have the one on Friday at 9
Friday, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I sent that request or that reminder out this morning and have been getting RSVPs, so it should be well attended.
Yeah, I had it wrong. I thought it was Thursday. I just read it wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now that you mention it, John, I might just put together another web page on our bridge replacement site to just kind of house all that information.
Well, yeah, because it's kind of a thorny subject. I mean, none of us really have authority to be doing what we're doing, in the sense of just it's not formal. It's all exploratory.
Right.
And sooner or later, we got to bring it into the codified with notice and get buy-in from the various counties and cities.
Well, it'll likely be the sole remaining committee after the NEPA process is over.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll likely have legs and we'll keep moving.
And you'll definitely hand off the ball.
Sound like Genevieve just texted and said she needs about 5 more minutes. I guess we lost the connection.
How can we keep talking to each other then if we don't have an internet connection?
Well, maybe I think it might just be the port office. Everybody at home, it's got a good signal's fine.
Oh, we got Michael though.
So last I talked to Genevieve, she's going to step in here and we're going to share this one.
6 feet.
So who's got the sunset shot behind him? Christy.
That's Christy. I've been watching it though. It has not changed. So
No.
that's lasting a long time at Christie's house.
A permanent sunset. Yeah, that was interesting. While we were meeting, there was a police officer that showed up at the door and then the doors opened, so we walked right in. And he was from Critfic and he said that he had been struck by a vehicle on the bridge.
Yeah, I'm working. I found 4 vehicles that matches description.
You've already looked it up, Fred? Have you
Yeah,
got
that's what I was
video of
doing
the vehicle?
in the meeting, so.
Sorry, I'm back. I was 1 minute late.
Genevieve, are you on? Can you hear us?
I am on. Sorry about that, you guys. I couldn't reconnect. But it looks like everything continued without me. So I'll just go back to the packet in just 1 second. What topic are you on?
I don't see Emily Fitzgerald. Did we lose her?
Yeah, Emily emailed me that she can't attend for the rest of the meeting, but she hopes our technical glitches get worked out and she'll follow up with me later.
Okay.
Let me get to where I need to be.
Are we still on the director's report?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just finishing up, so if there are any questions, I can take them. Oh, no, that's right. Fred was giving a quick update on traffic volumes.
I've done that.
Okay. Yeah, so any questions on my report?
I have one question on the memorandum from Marla Harvey of the Energy Council Coordinator.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't here last year when we did this, so I'm just curious, what does that mean? What is that? Is that an automatic give? Is that a discussion? Is that go through the budget committee, or what happens? What happens with that?
That'll be a discussion at the budget committee. We'll walk through the different memberships and different contributions we're making, and the budget committee will need to decide whether to include it in the budget or not. I will say that on that particular one, they typically would want, if it's in the budget and it's been approved, they would want their funding soon after July 1.
Yeah, and then, because, Commissioner Merriweather sits on that committee.
Yeah, I'll jump in. The Port of Cascade Locks, Port of Hood River County, and the City of Hood River all participate in essentially sustaining with annual requests at the Energy Council. I believe this Hood River City and the county and the Port of Hood River contribute $10,000 apiece, so they have the last 2 or 3 years. The Port of Cascade Locks contributes $5,000, and the council is working to try to develop additional support, ongoing support, although each of those entities just does it on an annual basis. And that's the request for this next year from the Energy Council to be considered as part of the budget process.
Is that what you had in mind, Christy?
Well, I would hope that we would have a discussion about it before giving it an automatic yes or no. But we're all a part of we'll all be at that budget committee meeting, correct? Or is that not for commissioners?
That's for commissioners.
That's all commissioners and 5 members of budget committee, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we can talk about it at that time.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that concludes my report.
Then we got commissioner and committee reports. There we go. Does any commissioner have anything to talk about? We had no committees reporting, I don't believe. That takes us to action items. And the rent relief policy.
Okay, so this is pretty similar to the one you saw at the last meeting. Again, very general. We just wanted to be able to put some bookends on rent relief and give ourselves some guidelines for when we begin to get requests in, which again, we already have, but no formal requests yet until after the policy is approved. And just some updates for you guys. 14 out of our 23 tenants have applied for either the PPP or the EIDL funds from the CARES Act. I haven't heard that any of them have received their actual funds. Some of them were approved, some of them were not yet, but I haven't heard that anybody has actually gotten funded at this point. And so hopefully the additional stimulus that was passed today, hopefully that will get to some of our businesses here. But many of our tenants did apply for those funds. Yeah, so like I said, pretty similar to the last one that you saw. Are there any questions on the policy?
I had one, Ann.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I'm not reading the whole thing again. I'm just looking at the computer. I've obviously applied for and studied the PPP very well. I would assume that any recipient of a PPP would not be eligible for a rent reduction from us.
Well, it depends, right? Because some people can only have a certain amount of the PPP go to their rent, as I understand it.
Not
But
some
yeah,
people at all. The PPP, a 75% has to go towards employee payroll. The other 25% and not more is specifically for rent and for very few other things like mortgage interest and utilities. But rent is something that is called out as allowable to 25%.
right. I guess that's what I meant is the 25% thing. And so if you go on the second page of the policy, if rent relief conditions, if relief is granted and the tenant gets funds that can be applied to rent, then the port is going to, require that we get some of those funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Ann, Commissioner Strike, how do we track that? If they get relief from that stimulus package, from the 3.50 package, $300 billion, how do we get notified that our tenant got some capital?
Well, we're asking that they notify us. And number two, there is, I believe, going to be published record of who got how much funds. So I believe that's part of the oversight, is that will be publicly available. But again, I'm not certain on that, but we are asking them to let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, then thanks, Sam. You want to take up the approve the contract with Aaron Fager?
Wait, sorry, was there an action on the policy?
Yeah, we need a,
Excuse me. Yeah. So can I get a motion to approve the COVID-19 rent relief policy?
I'd honestly love something in there about if tenants receive relief funds that are applicable to rent, that they're not eligible for this.
So that would be a little bit different because they're going to ask, maybe, if I may, they're going to ask probably for relief before they know if they're eligible for all the stimulus that's out there. So
That could be refundable to us, or they could owe us after they get it. And that's a good point, but they
Right.
could reimburse us later down the road.
That's right, because we're not sure how this is all going to roll out or how long it's going to last. So we want to make sure that we're protecting them and giving them the support they need. But then if they do get reimbursed, then we're going to expect that reimbursement to flow through to us.
As long as that specifically is in there, then yes.
Yeah, I'm with Ben. I think that if they receive funds, they need to be applied, and so it's almost like a case, like this might be like a, the start, but after this thing happens, we need to be in constant contact with them of when they're receiving funds, how much they're receiving, and move forward based upon what their needs are. And
Yeah,
Well-
and how this will be processed is this is going to be a lease amendment. So this is going to be a binding agreement in there, and we'll have verbiage that speaks directly to that as far as reimbursement goes. Again, depending on what sort of negotiation the board approves with each tenant. But again, the rental relief policy on the second page, number 2, does specifically state that they need to notify us and promptly pay the port for any of those relief funds that are applicable.
And the one thing I note, Ann, is once those funds are received on these kinds of grants, it is not, most people are going to do this and want it to be refundable, obviously, and they are potentially refundable. However, you have a 60-day clock to use those funds from the day that they're granted to you. So if someone receives funds today, they will not be able to be reimbursed for any funds that they spend 60 days after today from that program. So it makes it a little difficult to figure it out down the road. They just need to understand that if they are granted funds, they owe us whatever we have granted in relief. And it can't be just from those funds, because there is a clock. Like anything that I don't use in the next 60 days, I don't get refund or reimbursed for. So that's one little caveat that I want to make sure we're careful about.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm also a little bit nervous just with how fast these programs are changing and how many different programs that there are. I mean, we couldn't even apply for a PPP loan because we can't open. So I understand that we need to have a policy in place, but I almost think that it needs to be, this is subject to change based upon the fluidity of what's happening with everything that's going on with our government right now.
Yeah, and again, we tried to write it really generally to give us just some parameters to basically open up negotiations with tenants so that we're not tying ourselves to, just the CARES Act or just governmental assistance, because there's a lot of private foundation assistance out there too that is meant to help tenants with rent. So we wanted to, again, write it generally so we at least had some direction and parameters to negotiate with them. But again, each deal is going to come before the commission and is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So as that allows us some flexibility as we move forward and as things change to respond to those changes.
And I think that's key. And it's obviously new territory, but things are going to change. And this is flexible, I think, in general enough that we will deal with it on a case-by-case basis. And there may be particular circumstances with an applicant that wouldn't necessarily come to a play with another one. And we're just going to have to do that and be willing to spend some time working through it.
I think, I agree with Commissioner Merriweather, but I just think if this does come to the commission and a particular tenant has requested 2 months, as an example, of relief from the port, we should know if they have received 2 months of relief from the federal government as part of that discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe as part of each amendment, we would have essentially a relief report, and that's what they have to provide us to when they apply for the rent relief, is they have to give us a summary of what they've applied for and what they've received so we can get a better picture of what they're doing. So we'll have a report with each amendment that we come to you with.
Yeah, and I think it would be important too to know, the report should be what they've applied for now, and then maybe a requirement that they have to update as they apply for future. Like, I think that they just approved another round of stuff. And so, yeah, I just want to make it very fluid with how fluid everything is.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully future funding, I mean, the new funding that was just passed is also going to run through the PPP and the EIDL already stood up programs. So it's not a new program, it's just additional funding. So we're hoping that that'll, remain unless they make major changes with those programs.
Yeah, we just hope, frankly, we have no impact on how this is going to evolve. Yeah. I guess it comes down to verification. It'd be really great, Ann, if they do post or publish or make public record who got money, and you could just look it up. That would be very good.
Yeah, I just received something this afternoon from the SBA that is supposed to be a list like that. I haven't had time to look through it yet, but I'll investigate that to see what kind of public listings there are.
The thing I worry about with the list for you, Ann, is that, like Ben said, this is all a ticking time clock, and a lot of small business owners who are not receiving some good financial advice may not even know that they have to apply it to next month's rent, and they can't hoard it until they want to use it later. And so that's the thing that I worry about. If we rely on published lists, we might be past the deadline for when they're going to be, when it's going to financially benefit them the most to utilize these programs.
Well, and again, we're not going to rely on published lists. We're going to rely on the tenants to tell us what they're doing, because there's no other way to do it that I can see or understand. If it's a requirement of the amendment, if it's a requirement of the application for relief, and secondarily or thirdly, we're looking at published lists that are available, then I think that's covering all the bases we can cover right now, unless there's other options of how to check and see what they're doing.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted you to be in direct contact with them, not relying on later lists. So awesome, thank you very much, Ann. It's really good.
Yep.
Okay, are we ready for a motion then?
So then I guess a motion to approve the COVID-19 rental relief policy.
I will second Commissioner Chapman's motion to approve.
Okay, we got a motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Now, Aaron Fager.
As part of the direction from the board to move forward with planning activities for development projects, the airport is on that list. Aaron Fagery is a highly recommended, very experienced architect and airport planner. He's done a lot of work in airports around the country. And so this contract is to move forward commercial hangar, very basic design up to about 10%, with the intention of having that design be marketed for potential pre-lease, and then secondarily have him help us with some basic designs that would support going out to private developers who could build box hangars on port lease land on the east side of the airport. So 2 separate projects here. And this is a $15,000 contract for him to get both of those to a point where we can go out and gauge interest and potentially secure some pre-leases.
Okay, anybody have any comment? I think we talked about this last meeting as well. Absent discussion, can I get a motion?
I move we approve the contract with Aaron Fagery and Associates for architecture design services at the airport not to exceed $15,000.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And Brad, you have a resolution you'd like us to adopt? Do we still have Fred?
There we go. All right. So this is just to clarifying some language. So Jerry went back and we're just making the language basically match up against the statutes. So, you know, the statute, we used ancillary fee, the statute says administrative fees. We used late fees, and the statute just wants, you know, is saying, hey, well, that falls into the civil penalty area. And so Jared just wanted to basically take a look, and he wrote up this resolution that just clarifies everything, just to make sure that if any legal action we have, it ties back to the statute. It's more explicit, I guess.
Okay. Then I guess we need a motion to adopt the resolution.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2019-20-6, clarifying language in the prior resolution of 2019-20-5.
Thank you.
I'll second.
I'm going to move to second it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's eye, passes. And we have the commission call, which Commissioner Merriweather was going to, we spoke earlier, I guess yesterday, to see if he would give us a regular update on the Emergency Operations Center. And I should have asked for this at number 6, David. Could you do that now?
Sure. It's still active. I'm working. I've actually taken a step back a bit this last week from the position of business liaison. But I contacted the EOC today, and I'm going to get more involved in it again. So actually, I've been a little bit behind what's going on this last week. But I think from a business standpoint and what we're doing, the next thing that we need to be conscious of is that migrant labor is going to begin to come into the county in greater numbers in the next month or so. And working with the Extension Service as well as the Fruit Growers Association, the packing houses and others, trying to get information out to the folks that are coming in with regard to social distancing and some of the practices that they'll need to go on during particularly cherry harvest. We're fortunate for Hood River County that even though we do have cherries, we're not on the scale Wasco is, and that's where the real focus is coming in terms of the migrant labor that's coming in. And so to a certain extent, we'll have more time before we get into pairs to sort of see how that develops and what sort of things come forward. You've already talked about the Senate approved today reinvestment in the CARES Act, putting some more money in. The CARES Act had $354 billion, I believe, for small business PPP program. That was gone last week. It went through it that fast, so they put some more in today. That still has to go to the House, but it's expected to pass there, and the president will probably sign it. So there's some additional things there. In terms of processing, and Ben, you may be able to speak to this better than I can. The SBA is slammed. They're not able to process things through as quickly as they had hoped. Even with that, they're handling it better than the Employment Department, Oregon Department of Employment. And that is still terribly backlogged. It went from a 3.3% unemployment rate with 100 claims takers in the state. They now have 450, and they're trying to get up to 800 to be able to handle this 300,000 claims that they've received in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's really log jammed. A lot of people out of work, and they're not getting any relief at this point. And that includes people in Hood River County. So it's a problem just processing everything through. The money's been authorized, but to go from a staff of 100 to 800 employment department, I mean, they have to train them first. So you just cannot handle that kind of a crush very effectively. They're doing the best they can. So there's a lot of frustration out there. A lot of people out of work, a lot of businesses closed down. It's an unfortunate time. But I think most people are responding and handling it pretty well under the circumstances. We talked earlier, Michael talked about the governor's plan to begin to ease some of the restrictions, particularly in areas that can demonstrate a capacity to deal with the situation. Also, those that have so far had relatively few cases. We've had 4 in Hood River County. That's they're only, well, other than us, you have to go out to the eastern part of the state to find counts lower than that. So if we start as a first wave of releasing or relaxing some of the restrictions, arguably Hood River County could be one of them. Most of the other counties aren't anywhere near the Portland metro area. So I don't know how the county commission, which would really have to file an application for that, will deal with that. They don't have to worry in John Day about floods of day trippers coming in from Portland, but we certainly would if we open things back up. So I don't know how that's going to help. But we still don't have a death in Hood River County. We have had the last case that we had was a worker at a care center here in town, but I'm not aware that there have been any further cases that have evolved from that, which is very fortunate so far. So it looks like there's going to be some motion toward relieving the restrictions, although the timing is still uncertain and who would be eligible. It's going to be based on a lot of factors that'll be taken into consideration.
David, can I ask you a question on your first comments?
Sure.
Regarding migrant and temporary labor in the area, you're right. Wasco County is going to be affected before Hood River because of the cherry harvest being earlier.
Right.
A significant number of those employees transition from cherries directly into pears.
Right.
Or they transition and they started in California before they came here and then back home.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any discussion with Wasco County on how, because that's going to be a kind of a great forecast for what our market's going to be like. Who has there been any discussion with them on what they're seeing for their labor?
Well, yes, we've been in contact, or I have not personally, but in contact with, and I've forgotten the woman's name, but she works with the Extension Service in Wasco County, and she is the one developing the protocols and guidance with regard to the migrant labor, and they will be working with us and making that available to us as well. So it's been sort of coordinated at that level. And she's taking the lead on that with the Wasco County. And it's actually a Wasco Sherman Gillum EOC combined there. And so we're fortunate that someone with the extension district that they have there is putting that together, and it's going to be available to us as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I guess next up is executive session, and Genevieve, you wanted to recess for 15 minutes between? Oh, you're muted, Genevieve.
Sorry, rookie mistake. Yeah, we can make it 10 minutes, actually. I just we need to officially adjourn, and then I will end the live stream. And so we do need you to call out the statute numbers and when we adjourn and go into executive session. That'll be the end of the public portion of the meeting.
Well, we don't adjourn, we recess, right? And we have to come back into regular
Recess.
session to.
Yeah,
Pardon?
yeah.
Okay.
Maybe Jerry could help me with the.
That's correct.
Right. Then, in that
Do we
case,
just stay on and come back in 10 minutes, or do we have to log out and come back in?
Just stay on. It'll just be, the live stream will end, the public portion of the meeting will end. And before we adjourn, I have been checking emails throughout the meeting. We haven't received any new public comment. So then if everybody can just hang out and we can start at 7:55 with executive session.
okay. Then I'll recess the regular session and go into executive session under ORS 192.6602E, real estate negotiations, and ORS 192.6602H, legal consultation on current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. See everybody at 7:55.
Thank you.